analysis systems. We're at a moment where technology is highly susceptible to bias and there are no safeguards.
Tonight at 10 on WTTW. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by viewers like you and by the following.
This is our great-grandfather who had a dream in 1945 to open a family business in his name. This is our grandfather who expanded on that dream, bringing custom furniture to Chicago. This is our father and his brothers who grew that dream into the 10 showrooms here today. This is us, 4 sisters who want to make the generations before us proud while making Chicago homes beautiful. Since 1945, this is Smith.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center.
In New Orleans, they use tradition to turn death into celebration.
This pandemic hit the Black community disproportionately.
A funeral director has to think out of the box in order to survive.
We in the funeral industry, we are last responders.
Tuesday at 10 on WTTW.
Put on your thinking cap. What famous rap artist is a graduate of Jones College Prep?
They could all be true.
They're all from Chicago.
Thinking of the West Side.
I also went to Jones.
Get ready for the Great Chicago Quiz Show.
All new Friday at 8 on WTTW. This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Jim and Kay Mabey.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
we are here for a purpose, and that purpose is vaccination.
Are you confused about how to get a COVID vaccine? We take on some of your questions.
Here in Illinois, there is no place for racism or discrimination of any kind.
Governor Pritzker joins local Asian American leaders to condemn the surge in anti-Asian hate crimes.
This is truly what democracy looks like.
2 competing proposals for police oversight strike a compromise.
The outcry that you've seen from people all across the city, different neighborhoods, really kind of speaks for itself.
Details on a proposed ordinance that would restrict where so-called house museums can open in Chicago.
One-on-one with Cook County's new public defender on his goals for the position and the challenges he'll face.
Heating costs are set to hit 2014 polar vortex levels next month. That and more business headlines from Cranes.
Are you looking forward to traveling domestically again? What you need to know about an October 1st deadline.
They give new vision to culture.
And a Greektown art exhibit combines mythology and current events. But first, some of today's top stories. The first hospital in the city to administer the COVID-19 vaccine will not be receiving more doses for a bit. This comes after reports from Block Club Chicago that the hospital vaccinated ineligible workers at the Trump Tower downtown, where several hospital leaders, including its chief operating officer, live.
We have already put plans together for other providers to kind of take up the work that Loretta was doing, but clearly they've got to have better systems in place, better controls. They've got to have better data infrastructure to make sure that they can track people who they're supposed to be serving. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I don't expect them to be coming back online anytime soon.
But the union representing the nurses at Loretto, Ask Me Local 1216, says, quote, now that the safe, effective COVID vaccines are available, we have been the ones delivering the shots to protect our community. Our work is critically important and we do not want it disrupted. We call on the city to restore Loretto Hospital's supply of vaccine doses. Our community, which has been systematically ignored and under-resourced for decades, should not be punished now for the reported actions of a few. And Amanda Venicky has more on the vaccine rollout, confusion, and Loretto in just a bit. Illinois public health officials say another 1,200 people have been diagnosed with the coronavirus since yesterday, and there have been 22 additional deaths. More than 1,223,000 people have been diagnosed over the last year in Illinois, and 21,103 people have died. The state's vaccination rate today is up to nearly 14%. Southside advocates fighting to keep Mercy Hospital open gained another victory today as a state health board approved the sale of the hospital for $1 to a Michigan biomedical technology firm. The approval could mean that the Safety Net Hospital will not have to close at the end of May as planned by current owner Trinity Health Corporation. Crane Chicago Business is reporting the new owner, Insight, says the firm plans to bring the hospital closer to solvency and doesn't plan to discontinue any services. Vaccine eligibility in Illinois will open up to everyone by mid-April, but there's a lot of different windows of eligibility leading up to then. Amanda Vinicky joins us now to help break it all down. Amanda.
Brandis, on one hand, you have more vaccine coming, more opportunities to get one. And on the other hand, it is so confusing about who is eligible. This comes as just today, Cook County and the state opened up another mass vaccination site, this one in Forest Park.
Having the access to a vaccine in a site that is accessible to communities that have been devastated and hit the hardest during this pandemic, it's so crucial because it's a matter of saving lives.
Already, Cook County does have mass vaccination sites in Tinley Park, also Des Plaines. Now, this new one opens later this week on Friday.
Starting Friday, this location, which will be able to administer up to 1,000 doses per day at launch and then over 2,000 soon after. And it will serve as yet another mass vaccination site open to all eligible residents, no matter their zip code.
Now, I want you to focus on that last phrase that the governor uttered, and that is, as long as they're eligible. And therein lies the confusion, because Cook County is operating on different guidelines and timelines than is the city of Chicago, than is the state. So maybe you just say, to heck with it, I want to try calling to get an appointment. Both the city, county, and state do have hotlines, but good luck. Our team struggled to connect when they tried to get through to Cook County's number. They did succeed in getting through to the states.
Representatives from the Illinois Department of Health will never require that you supply financial information or require payment to be placed on a waiting list. If you have already scheduled your vaccination appointment, press 1. If you have not yet scheduled your appointment, please press 2.
For those who want to make an appointment in another means by avoiding a phone call and all of that robot voice, you can do it by going online. But again, kind of troublesome because Illinois' 97 local public health departments can each do their own thing with this. Another way, you can try individual pharmacies' websites. Also, Chicago does have one central website, that is ZocDoc. Beyond that, though, there is no centralized state or government-run website where you can find what appointments are available throughout Illinois. One option for that, you can visit, it's called vaccinespotter.org, and this scans pharmacies for any sort of open appointments. It was started by a Denver resident, Nick Muter, who did it as a side project. He says that he's not really focusing on eligibility, it's more opportunity, but he does hear from other folks who access the website, and he says that in other locations, eligibility is murky too.
To make matters more confusing, there were some situations where it varied by city. So it's like if you were in Philadelphia, it was different than if you were in the rest of Pennsylvania, or if you were in New York City, it was different from the rest of New York. So yeah, I mean, I don't know sort of all of the craziness that's happening, but yeah, I think I do at least hear from users that face, I think, a lot of this similar confusion across the country.
So what is the deal here? Starting today, Illinois is opening up and has opened up eligibility to members of the media, also to those who work in higher education and are government employees. Then next week on March 29th, other workers like those who work in restaurants and in the construction trades are also added. But again, that is only for Illinois, outside of Cook County and Chicago. Cook County is starting what it's calling 1B plus as of today. That's something in effect already elsewhere in the state of Illinois, and that is when individuals 16 and older who have certain health conditions will become eligible. Also, certain essential workers. Now, in Chicago, again, moving to 1C at the end of this month. And so this is all, again, really confusing. That is when Chicago will do those folks with health conditions and essential workers, March 29th. When it comes down to it, officials say that everyone is going to get their turn. It is just a matter of when.
Our pace in the marathon is quickening, but today we are still a little bit ways from the finish line, and we ask people to continue to wash your hands, keep your distance, wear your mask, be patient.
There is still confusion, though, as we mentioned, particularly after Block Club's reporting that Loretto hospital executives gave connected people, like those that shopped at an executive's favorite high-end jewelry store, vaccines that were meant for needed West Siders. State Senator Kim Lightford is also serving as vice chair of Loretto's board, and she says that those executives have been reprimanded and sanctioned.
I'm not telling you what we did as a board. That was an executive decision behind closed doors. Neither one of them were pleased, of course. Perhaps thought we were a little heavy-handed, and I assure you it won't happen again.
Lightford says the CEO is apologetic, but she says that we could see another story emerge about vaccines going to the wrong places. Now, by the way, I did call around a bunch of pharmacies, Walgreens, Meijer, Kroger, to ask questions like, what eligibility guidelines are they using? After all, these are stores that are located, let's say, in Chicago, which is in Cook County, which is in the state of Illinois. Walgreens did get back to me and just said that eligibility is set by jurisdiction, and we follow eligibility guidelines based on where the patient receives a vaccine. Now, the governor says through all of this, more is on the way. I've mentioned the end of March several times. Another key date for that is when Governor Pritzker says Illinois is expected to receive millions of shipments of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine on top of the Pfizer and Moderna allocations that it already receives. And that, he says, is why eligibility is going to be wide open, again, just in Illinois, not necessarily Chicago and Cook County, starting April 12th. So, Brenda, back to you.
A little bit of confusion there, Amanda, but thank you for clearing that up. And now to Paris, and a look into the surge of anti-Asian hate crimes. Paris.
Brenda, it's the Atlanta shootings that left 8 people dead, including 6 Asian women, are resonating here in Illinois. Today, Governor J.B. Pritzker joined with local leaders of the Asian American community to condemn anti-Asian American violence. Now, the governor also had this message for Illinois' Asian American population.
I want the AAPI community in Illinois to know that I see you, and I see the fear and anxiety that these events have forced into your lives and the lives of your loved ones. And I want you to know that Illinois is your home, and I will do everything in my power as governor to protect you and to welcome you.
And joining us now with more are Yoon-Sun Choi, a professor at the University of Chicago. Her research is focused on debunking Asian American stereotypes. Grace Chan McKibben, executive director of the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community. And In-hae Choi, executive director of the Hana Center in Albany Park, which provides services to Korean Americans and other immigrant communities. Welcome all of you to Chicago tonight.
Thank you for having us.
And In-hae, I want to begin with you. According to one study from California State University, anti-Asian American hate crime was up 150% last year. To what do you attribute that to?
Well, I think there are many factors. I think immediately we could think about the last 4 years of this country where there have been so many brazen, attacks on immigrants, Asians. And with the coronavirus, with the last administration leaders really calling it and labeling it as a Chinese virus, but also even there's been fake news that really attributed to saying that it was manufactured in China and deliberately spread it. Those type of things definitely attributed to it. But I also want to say, I don't think that we can, deny that this is not necessarily a new incident. It's a new manifestation and expression, but it's a long history of violence against, racism against Asians, starting with massacres of Chinese folks and, the exclusion acts and human zoos of Filipinos. And they're just, it's a long history. So this is just like a one event that's linking to that. So that's really an important thing to remember.
And Grace Chan McKibben, what kind of incidents have we seen in the Chicago area, particularly over the last year?
I think we've been working with organizations like Hana Center and with Asian Americans Advancing Justice in Chicago, and we have not seen the number of incidents that we've seen in New York or LA or San Francisco, nor the level of violence. What we've heard about are incidents like dirty looks or people avoiding folks on the street or yelling at them, and so aggressions rather than actually violent incidents.
And Yun-Sun Choi, what is the best way to combat this right now, to reduce the violence, at least in the short term?
Well, I think short term is the involvement. The Asian American community need to be much more vocal, and silence is not going to serve anyone. And keeping your head down and just work hard, as the stereotypes would dictate, are not serving anyone and doesn't protect anyone. So I think we need to be much more politically involved. And also, it's also important to increase the awareness in other groups, including other groups of people of color as well.
And certainly you saw the governor today, Mayor Lightfoot, so politicians have been speaking out in recent days. In Choi, let's talk about the murders in Atlanta. The suspect who murdered 6 Asian women, 8 people total, 6 of them Asian American women, he says he had a sex addiction, had frequented these massage parlors. Is there as much a gender-motivated aspect of this crime as a racially motivated aspect?
Thank you for that question. That's really a critical point to also connect to what is happening, because I think that because of the rise of anti-Asian hate across the country, that we are very much first going to that this is an anti-Asian hate, which it is. But what's really important is that among all the recorded reporting of the violence, almost 68%, almost 70% of all the reported violence were really directed at women. And what's happened in Atlanta, where it's, the law officers were saying he was having a bad day. He's just a sex addict. It's a one way to isolate that. But that in itself is a very poignant matter where it is a racialized misogyny that's also lifting up here. It's also about gender-based violence. It's about white supremacy and sexism that's at play that we must remember to lift up. And that sexism in itself is just it's a perpetual in every community, but that's really coming to at play where we're being targeted for this. And we have been speaking with young Asian American women in our community, and they're terrified. They're terrified, even though they didn't were not directly violated in this way. They still feel very violated, and they feel because they're living with that fetishization of Asian American women that's very prevalent in our community.
And Yun-Sun Choi, can you go further into that? I mean, these stereotypes here, sexualization of Asian American women, especially working in massage parlors, how prevalent and how strongly do Asian American women feel those stereotypes?
So, I think it's in the media. The perpetuation of sort of hypersexualization of Asian women has been so pervasive. And also we need to remember just looking at the statistic and then also demographics of the victims of the Atlanta shooting really shows that these people who are committing these crimes are simply cowards. They're targeting the most vulnerable, the people who may not be physically strong enough to fight back. So these people are targeting. So that's all product of the sort of media and the portray and sort of the treatment of the Asian women as sexual object and whatnot. But also these people are cowards.
Grace Chan McKibben, You were talking about ways to combat this, or we were talking about that. There's some talk that having more police involvement or protection of the Asian American community isn't necessarily the best route to go, because there is some fear among Asian Americans in the police. Can you expound on that?
I think there definitely are people that are calling on more police presence. We think that that is only part of the solution. Is not the solution for this type of incidents completely. That we really need to have the community work closely together, both with law enforcement and with other community members and with government, to provide the needed services more than anything else, and also education. Any reporting that needs to happen has to be, there needs to be language access services so that folks can use their native language in reporting incidents.
In Choi, we talked about some of the short-term solutions. What about the long-term solutions here?
Yeah, I do think that this is a moment for the government and the leaders to really think about, you know, why are people struggling so much in so many ways? And it's really to look at, even as dire as the current situation, to look at what would support community members. Think about those folks who are working in spas and massage parlors, and they could also be undocumented. And so rather than more policing, they're looking for supports like access to healthcare, living wage jobs, access to housing, and, you know, education and programs like that. And particularly for the undocumented people, what they need right now is pathway to citizenship for all 11 million people, so that they're protected, so that they could be living here in a secured way.
Yoon-Sun Choi, there is legislation in the Illinois General Assembly to teach things like the Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese American internment camps, and make this mandatory part of history education. Will these things help?
That will definitely help, because, you know, we are so used to be invisible. The history and the experiences of Asian Americans has been brushed off, and people sort of take it that almost it's pervasively fine to, say, throw racial jokes on Asians because we are so associated with the foreign countries.
All right.
So education will be very critical.
And we'll have to see where those efforts go. We'll have to leave it here for now. Our thanks to Yoon-Sun Choi, Grace Chan McKibben, and In-Hae Choi. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, two groups with competing proposals for elected civilian police oversight in Chicago have come together. The Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability and Civilian Police Accountability Council plans are now a single ordinance under a compromise deal, formed as the mayor says she's busy crafting her own proposal. Alderman Roderick Sawyer, who supports the compromise plan, says the mayor's lack of action on police oversight pushed the two groups to come together.
Thanks to Mayor Lightfoot for putting us together by delaying what we thought was a vote for transformative change. But now we have a true people's ordinance, a unity ordinance that we feel is the most transformative police oversight bill in the United States.
And joining us now are Frank Chapman of the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which backed the CPAC proposal, and Desmond Yancey of the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability. Now, we also invited the mayor's office to send a representative from the city or police department. They declined, but provided a statement, which we will discuss in just a moment. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Desmond, let's start with you, please. You know, these two groups have had competing proposals for some time now. What brought you together? How did you come together?
Well, mutual interest, right? We've been working independently for years to transform policing and found ourselves at a crossroads, right? Where we could do nothing, but we could come together and do something transformative, and that's exactly what we've come together to do.
So this proposal would have, Frank, it would have committees in each police district and a citywide commission, civilian oversight over the head of COPA, that's the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, and final say on disputes between COPA and the police board, and would force the mayor to choose the police superintendent and board members from candidates approved by the Civilian Commission. Frank Chapman, how significant of a change would this mark from the current system?
Well, it's a very significant change because for once in the history of policing in this city, and I'll go so far as to say in this nation, we have community input into the process. The community has historically been excluded. Now they are included, where we have an opportunity to say who polices our communities and how our communities are policed. This is a decisive voice that's been needed in order to deal with, the whole question of police accountability and police crimes and abuses.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, the city did not send a representative, but the mayor's office provided us a statement that reads in part, quote, "We are currently reviewing the newly combined GAPA-CPAC proposal. Policy changes of such a magnitude and important nature take considerable time and effort to get right and cannot be introduced without the appropriate due diligence and consideration." It goes on to say, as such, the mayor expects to introduce a comprehensive plan for civilian oversight before the Public Safety Committee at next month's committee meeting. Desmond, are you hopeful that the mayor will incorporate any or all of your ideas into her proposal?
I would rather she wouldn't. I would rather she get behind the people's proposal. We've been working on this, again, as I've said, for years, and even in her own words, when she chaired the Police Accountability Task Force, she said that the commission should be designed from the community, and the community should design its powers. And we here in the community haven't heard anything from her related to her proposal. And while we haven't heard anything from her, what we've done is had hundreds and hundreds of conversations with thousands of residents across the city, built a coalition of aldermen from different sides of the city to make sure that we put forth a proposal that had the support of the city, but also was robust and transformative. So I would prefer for her to get behind our proposal, and anything less than a proposal that was designed by the community is going to fall short of what the community deserves.
Now, Frank, 29th Ward Alderman and Public Safety Committee Chair Chris Taliaferro has said that some of the changes you're seeking, he calls them overreaching. Shouldn't the mayor retain or maintain some of the authority that you all are seeking in your proposal?
Well, the mayor does maintain some of her authority in the proposal. What Taliaferro is objecting to, what it sounds like he's objecting to, is our participation, the community. Is that the overreach he's talking about? This is democracy. I agree with Alderman Sawyer. This is what democracy looks like. We need community participation, and democracy is not overreach. It's something that we should always be fighting for, something that we should always be trying to expand.
Now, Desmond, the ordinance also contains a binding referendum that would go on the 2020 ballot. What would that do?
What the binding referendum will do is give the people of the city of Chicago to decide if they want to expand the powers of the commission as we've created in our ordinance. And I just want to focus, the transformation is in the ordinance. The ordinance is 25 pages long, and I would much rather spend a little bit of time talking about just how much community engagement is involved in this, just how transformative it is. I can't state enough that to have the people involved in the process of selecting the superintendent of the police department is huge. To have the people involved in setting police department policy is huge and unheard of, and absolutely necessary when we look at how far the Chicago Police Department has to go in terms of transformation and how far they've gone on their own. They need us in order to do this.
And I hear you on that, talking about the community as well, Desmond. I'm sure we will talk about this more as it goes forward. But before I let you guys go, Frank, do you have the votes for this that are needed in City Council?
I believe we do. If we combine the votes that we already have for CPAC and the votes that we have for GAPA, we've now joined those together, which means that all the people who were supporting CPAC and all the people who were supporting GAPA are now one. I think we have the votes. That doesn't mean that we're not going to have to lobby for them, but I'm confident that we have the votes.
Okay, I'm sure more on this going forward. In the meantime, my thanks to Desmond Yancey and Frank Chapman for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Up next, celebrating Greece's 200th Independence Day. Stick around.
And we have much more ahead on the program, including details about a proposed ordinance that would restrict so-called house museums in residential neighborhoods. But first, Chicago's Greektown is preparing to celebrate Greece's 200th Independence Day. It comes as traditional festivities have been canceled for the second year due to the coronavirus pandemic. However, the community has still found a way to brighten the streets. From Van Buren to Monroe, nearly a dozen 5-foot fish sculptures line Greektown's busy Halsted Street. The art pieces are part of the community's Fanciful Fish outdoor exhibit, which was created with families in mind. Eve Moran is chair of the Greektown Arts Committee. She says fish creations were chosen because children could easily identify them.
Fish were also part of the ancient diet in Greece, because Greece is a country surrounded by waters.
Every winter, Greektown's Special Service Area installs an outdoor art exhibit for residents and visitors to observe. This year, amid the coronavirus pandemic, the exhibit has new meaning.
I think it had a lot of relevance because people could not go to art galleries. People couldn't go to museums. Everything was sporadically. There were these ebbs and flows of what was open and what wasn't open. And here was a safe outdoor way for people to enjoy the art and be uplifted.
Professional and emerging Chicago artists alike painted the sculptures. It's a process that began last spring during the stay-at-home order. Logan Square-based artist Juan Cano used his signature shattered glass technique on one side of his sculpture.
I have Poseidon, and he's overlooking an iconic church from Santorini, Greece.
On the other side, Cano did a traditional painting of Santorini, Greece. He says creating the art piece provided an escape from the uncertainty of last spring.
It gives you an outlet to get away and to distract yourself from, the current situation, which was the beginning of COVID, what was going to happen, people are losing their jobs, the uncertainty.
Some artists, like Cano, centered their works around Greek mythology, while others pulled from current issues, like water conservation and the pandemic.
Usually my Greek school, we do it all as a school, but this year, sadly, because of COVID, we couldn't all be together, so I was selected to paint it.
Nicoletta Rencelos is a 7th grader at Coonley Elementary School. She painted the word love in more than 24 languages on the sculpture.
I really wanted to spread a message of love, and now in quarantine, it's really hard to remember and to find joy and stuff.
Many of the sculptures sit outside restaurants, essential businesses in Greektown that have been hit hard by the pandemic, especially without tourism to the area. Artists hope the exhibit can help bring more patrons.
I want to see more people coming back to Greektown. I'd love to see them joining us and ordering takeout.
Yanni Theo Harris is the owner of 9 Muses and Melly Cafe. He says he welcomes the artwork. He too hopes the exhibit brings more foot traffic and business to the area.
Oh, it's beautiful. Don't forget, Greeks introduced the art. We suffer a lot. The restaurants everywhere, not only in Illinois, everywhere. So we appreciate whatever can be done to bring more people down.
The exhibit runs through the end of April, and the community has a special virtual celebration planned for the 200th Greek Independence Day this Thursday evening at 7. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, record high sales of Chicago area homes. That and more business headlines from Cranes. The latest on a controversial proposal that would restrict so-called house museums in residential neighborhoods. Cook County has a new public defender, Sharon Mitchell Jr. We hear how he's preparing to do his job. And the deadline for getting a real ID has been extended to October 1st. What you need to know if you'd like to fly domestically. But first, some more of today's top stories. Father Michael Flager is speaking out about sexual assault allegations made against him and calling on the Archdiocese to complete its investigation sooner. In a letter, Flager maintains his innocence and says, quote, "In the meantime, I know that I cannot emotionally or spiritually continue to remain isolated in an apartment waiting for this board to do its job. While I hope and pray that the review board will work a little harder and more promptly to conclude their investigation, I will no longer wait in silence." Though the Department of Child and Family Services concluded its investigation last month, finding the allegations, quote, unfounded, the Archdiocese says it must complete its own. The activist priest says he'll begin to find a way to minister in Auburn Gresham as he awaits a decision. Chicago Public School students will receive more trauma support through a new healing-centered framework the district announces today. Schools Chief Janice Jackson says the pandemic has deepened the district's commitment to students' social and emotional well-being.
At its core, trauma is an equity issue. We've seen throughout this pandemic how students who live in our underrepresented communities have been disproportionately impacted, not only by this terrible disease, COVID-19, but the impact of closures, lack of resources, etc.
The framework expands behavioral health teams to every school, offers training to staff, and adds social-emotional learning through community partnerships. The district is committing $24 million to the 3-year initiative using funds from nonprofit Chicago Beyond, the Children First Fund, and federal COVID relief. And now to Paris for some of today's top business headlines. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. The cost for natural gas is set to reach levels not seen since 2014. The number of homes sold in the Chicago area is up by double digits from a year ago, and Fulton Market becomes the next frontier for housing developers after yet another residential high-rise is proposed for the area. Here to go behind the headlines is Crain's Chicago business reporter Danny Eckert. Danny, good to see you again. First with the heating story. So costs are expected to go way up. How much and why?
Well, it's not exactly clear how much, but it's going to be pretty painful, especially if April is pretty cold, like it can be. You had severe winter weather in Texas that basically crippled gas production while demand was soaring for heating and for electricity. So the result was the cost of natural gas went up a lot. It'll actually be more than double what it was for the same period last year and the highest level it's been since that polar vortex in 2014. And as we know, April can be chilly here. So the average gas bill last April in Chicago was $85. The same consumption this year would be at least $110. And what's really concerning here is that utilities next month will be able to begin or resume disconnecting households that are behind on their bills. They weren't able to do that during the pandemic now. And so as of January, nearly 3 out of 10 households were behind on their bills.
So public officials might have to address that. And also there's the ongoing giant People's Gas main replacement program. To your other story, more homes sold in the Chicago area last month than in any February going back to 2008. Some good real estate news. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, it's a continuation, really, of the housing boom we saw last summer and throughout COVID, really. I mean, two big factors. One, people want more space, especially if they're going to be working from home more frequently. And two, interest rates are still incredibly low. So, there were more than 7,000 homes that sold in February in the metro area. That was almost 15% more than last year, outpaced the national trend at 9%. So there's lots of happy sellers out there. But, of course, that only applies to those that aren't also buyers, too.
Interesting, and maybe related, there's a new proposal for a residential high-rise in Fulton Market. Now, this one's going to go north of Lake Street, which is kind of unusual. Tell us why.
Yeah, so until the pandemic started, Alderman Burnett, who oversees Fulton Market, put a ban basically on new residential development north of Lake Street in Fulton Market, which has obviously gone from this meatpacking neighborhood into this corporate destination. And early in the pandemic, Burnett said he was going to start allowing residential there, basically said, look, we want to try to catalyze new development here. So they did, and now we've got our first major proposal for new residential building, and it's a big one. It'll be 32 stories, 443 apartment units on the 1200 block of Fulton, which is now the Revel event space. So, we'll see whether this gets approved, but I think this is the first of what will be many of these to come as companies still probably looking to Fulton Market, and now the developers see a chance for people to live there. They're going to hop on it.
Certainly a hot area, and there's a lot of vacant land just to the north there that perhaps could be built on. All right, Danny, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
An ordinance going in front of City Council tomorrow would restrict so-called house museums. In recent weeks, the proposal has drawn intense criticism from some community groups and preservationists, and they say it would hamper the viability of what they call vital cultural spaces. But supporters of the ordinance say it's simply about instituting a review process for projects that could bring too much traffic to a neighborhood. Joining us with more are Naomi Davis, CEO of Blacks in Green, the group planning to convert the home of Emmett and Mamie Till in Woodlawn into a museum. 4th Ward Alderman Sophia King, sponsor of the ordinance at question. and Chandra Cooper, the president of the proposed Muddy Waters Mojo Museum at the blues musician's former home in Kenwood. Welcome all of you to Chicago tonight.
Thank you so much.
So, Alderman King,
thank you for having us.
You're welcome. As I understand, Alderman King, this ordinance would ask those that want to convert a home into a museum in most of the residential areas in Chicago to go get zoning approval from their alderman. Explain why you believe this ordinance is necessary.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having us. Happy to be here with Ms. Cooper and Ms. Davis. Just a slight correction, it wouldn't provide for zoning approval. It would mostly provide for something called a special use. What we're trying to do is just really involve the community. Our community simply wants to have their voices heard. So we're not trying to stop, inhibit, or deter cultural exhibits and museums. That's antithetical to what I've been doing. Our office landmarked the Ebony Jet building, the Johnson building. People know it as the Ebony Jet building. There was no outcry from the community when they wanted to take the sign down from the Ebony Jet building, but we pushed forward and really tried to preserve that. As you know, we've brought Ida B. Wells downtown. So preserving our history and culture, that's part of who we are. We just want to involve the community.
And Chandra Cooper, you're working on a museum here at the former home of your great-grandfather, the blues pioneer, Muddy Waters. How do you think this ordinance would impact your efforts to convert that home into a Muddy Waters museum?
Well, the process sounds quite easy, according to what Alderman King is saying. It's very extensive, actually. When you're changing the zoning, we have to go in front of the zoning board. There's a whole process in this. And so I honestly think that if this ordinance is changed on the books, the law is changed, it's probably going to prevent us from having a museum. As you know, right now, house museums outright can just, by their right, can just open. Now we're going to have to go under the authority of the alderman and the opinions of maybe some people who don't want this museum. And so I think this is going to be very hard for us and challenging, and I'm very concerned.
And Naomi Davis, how about to your efforts to the Till House project that you're overseeing, and then to the alderman's concerns that community voices should be allowed to be heard in this process?
Nobody believes in community voice more than Naomi Davis and Blackson Green, I can promise you that. And my track record in the community stands for that. And we stand with Alderman Jeanette Taylor. She's demonstrated her commitment to authentic community engagement. But we know the difference between authentic community engagement and that which is used as a cover for other purposes, other motivations. And we're not exactly sure what the bill is saying, what the proposed ordinance is saying. I've read it, what was available of it. I've watched the video 3 times. I'm a lawyer. I'm reasonably intelligent. I'm still not clear exactly what it says, what the impact will be, and the broad sweeping brush of it is overkill by any standards, especially when we're looking at the need for community engagement when we have been through an extensive community engagement process.
Alderwoman King, I want to give you a chance to respond to all of that.
Yeah, thank you. But first of all, I would say that landmark process, which the Emmett Till House went through, is very extensive and should be probably all that you have to go to. I will point back to the Muddy Waters, which is in the 4th Ward. Muddy Waters is in an RM5 district. It would not have to go through.
Can you explain what that means?
It would actually just have a special use. And so I think there's a lot of misinterpretation about what this is and what it isn't. It's really just trying to bring the voice of the community. Like I said, landmark, you provide extensive process in the community. You scrutinize, you have several community meetings, you come before a board, there's an approval, you go through, council. Why do they think that should be any different for something as impactful to a community, as a museum? We're simply saying that the community should be involved in that process. There's nothing nefarious going on. We've been actually working with the city for over a year And really, people didn't understand that there wasn't a process already. It was intuitive that there was, and there was a lot of digging and a lot of investigation to find out that it is indeed, as of right. And for something so impactful to a community, especially residents who have.
And I'll say it is impactful.
It should be something that the community should be involved. And so I would just ask, why, there's resistance.
Part of that, and you talk about impact on a community. Part of that impact, Chandra Cooper, is parking, logistical issues. Bringing a lot of folks to a residential community. What about those concerns?
So we work with the community, we work with the aldermen. In our case, and I don't want to just talk about, the Mojo Museum because there's other museums that are affected by this. But in our case, we have a parking lot across the street that we are given permission to use. And, we're going to have small hours, very short hours, boutique style museum. So we're not trying to impinge on the community or change the lifestyle of the people who live on that block. But this is critical. These museums in Chicago are critical. For the past 50 years, house museums have been able to open up outright.
And they would be as I understand, they'd be grandfathered in here with this ordinance. Naomi, you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, but there's no guarantee that anything is going to be grandfathered in. There's nothing in writing, and I'll say yes, they have been very impactful over the past 50 years, all to the positive. Alderman King is providing is offering an ordinance that's fixing something that has never been broken. The idea that is that we are wondering if it's just really about a failed effort to stop the Elijah Muhammad House for reasons that we can't imagine.
We only have a few seconds. I'm sorry, no, we only have a few seconds, but I do want to give Alderwoman King a chance to respond.
Yeah, no, it's there's nothing nefarious. I'm not sure why people are saying that. Really, it's just about involving the community. And, in the Muddy Waters case, the community is, coming to our office. They are complaining already, but it's not that they're against it. They want to understand, nor am I. Let's be clear, I'm not against any of those, but I think it's important to involve the community in those processes because they actually live there. None of these folks actually live in the community. So I don't understand why they wouldn't.
I think it's disingenuous
the people who actually live there. If you'd allow me to finish,
communities have not been involved.
Who actually live there,
who are developing these
in the process of something,
have been engaged in these communities for years and years. In a process designed. Exactly.
This is a very heated issue, but we are out of time. We have to leave it there. We thank you so much, Naomi Davis, Alderwoman Sophia King, and Chandra Cooper. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And now back to Brandis and one-on-one with a new member of the Cook County Justice System. Brandis.
Paris, Cook County has a new public defender. Coming into the position is Sharon Mitchell Jr., who had previously worked as an assistant Cook County public defender until he was selected as director of the Illinois Justice Project in 2016. He's coming in at a turbulent time. Jury trials are resuming today with a massive case backlog. A controversial criminal justice bill was signed by the governor last month. All of this amid the backdrop of COVID-19. Joining us now is Sharon Mitchell Jr., the new public defender for Cook County, who officially begins the term on April 1st. Sharon Mitchell, congrats on the new position, and thanks for joining us. So as I just mentioned, Cook County courts resuming trials, and there's a massive case backlog. How do you plan on handling all of this coming into this position at such a turbulent time?
Well, I think we're going to have to handle it by really getting together with both our leadership and our rank and file and figuring out what the best solution is. This is going to take, quite frankly, a lot of thought. Those conversations are already starting. It's going to take a lot of logistics. But I think the key thing is to be making sure that I hear from the staff and I hear from leadership, and I protect the safety of our clients and protect the safety of our staff in making the correct decisions.
How did you come to find your calling as a public defender?
I think it was early on. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. I'm a son of a librarian, a Chicago public librarian, a driver, a long-haul driver that finished his career at Streets and Sanitations. I was born at Michael Reese Hospital. I was raised for my first 6 years at South Shore, then spent the balance of my time my upbringing in West Pullman. You know, I grew up at a time where it was clear that the justice system wasn't all about, punishing the bad guys and protecting the good. You know, I never grew up with the thought that as soon as you see the blue lights that you'll be safe. I grew up knowing a system that too far often gets it wrong, whether it's through incarcerating the wrong person or over punishing someone that made a mistake and treating people with disrespect and sometimes violence. So it was early on. I interned at the public defender's office as a law student. I knew that I was interested in justice, didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And very early on, when I ran into a former classmate who couldn't believe that I was on the other side of the bars in a suit and tie instead of a khaki jumpsuit, that conversation, his wonderment that somebody from where I came from was able to do this just as a law clerk, it kind of defined what I do for the rest of my career. And I'm so excited to be here talking with you today.
Once you get into the position, what are your goals for the office?
Well, again, I start on April 1st, and I think it's incredibly important that we really take advantage of the wisdom in the room, whether it comes to leadership or rank and file. With that said, no matter what the case is, we've got a dual role. We've got to provide zealous advocacy to all that we are assigned to, and we've got to be an engine for progressive system change. So I'm going to be talking to folks, having conversations. I certainly have ideas, but I'm not the person that walks into a room and says, hey, I've got all the good ideas and I know exactly what we need to do. I need to be respectful of the wisdom in the room. But the reality is the reality. And, we've got to prep for two gigantic changes. You reference those, the opening of the courts, the changes presented by the wonderful Safety Act. And I'm just excited to really kind of think about, reevaluate how we do just the basics, how we collect data, how we train, how we advocate, and how we interact with the community that has demanded that the justice system, the legal system, give it better results.
You were very active and influential in the abolishing cash bail portion of the Safety Act that you just referenced, the criminal justice reform bill that the governor signed last month. Why was that an important issue for you?
Well, I think it's clear using money to make decisions about who should be in jail and who should not be in jail creates all types of really bad consequences for our communities, whether we're talking about the dollars that are pulled out of communities that can barely afford it, mainly paid by Black women, mothers, sisters, friends, and family, or it's the over-incarceration we see through a reliance on the use of cash bond, which has a big role when we're talking about problems further down the line, mass incarceration, wrongful convictions. I'm proud to be a part of that move. And quite frankly, it's something that folks have been working on for quite a long time because the current system just has failed to keep us safe. And the current system has failed to produce just results.
And how do you view the relationship between the public defender and the Cook County State's attorney?
Well, listen, it's an adversarial position in the courtroom. With that said, I think Attorney Fox has done an excellent job, an excellent job when it comes to policy decisions. When you're talking about the public defender and you're talking about the state's attorney, clearly given the roles, we won't always get along. But I am incredibly excited to work with somebody who has been a champion for progressive change. Attorney Fox has worked hard advocating for the end of money bond. She's worked hard on legalizing cannabis. Again, there'll be times where we won't get, we will have some back and forth because of the things that happen in the courtroom. But I respect Attorney Fox. I know that she is a champion for change. And, I'm just a fan.
And Sharon, I apologize, we've got about 30 seconds left, but COVID cases in the Cook County Jail had been relatively low as of late compared to the spikes that we saw last year. How do you plan on working with Sheriff Tom Dart to maintain that low infection rate?
Well, we'll talk with Sheriff Dart soon, hopefully. I start on April the 1st. And I think the key, though, is that we don't need to have a whole bunch of people in the jail. That the way the jail is set up, the way any jail is set up, is when you have too many people in the jail, you're going to have problems. So we need to be thinking deeply about how people get into the jail, how people get out of the jail, and that's going to be one of my main concerns.
Work is cut out for you, Sharon Mitchell, who'll be starting the job, as we said, on April 1st of Cook County Public Defender. Best of luck. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Up next, this past weekend's guest host for Latino Voices, Univision's Alex Hernandez talks with a member of the Secretary of State's office about an important deadline for the new Real ID. But first, a look at the weather.
In less than 7 months, all Americans flying domestically will need a federally accepted form of ID. That means a real ID or passport. The Department of Homeland Security had previously set a date of October 2020, but due to the pandemic, the deadline was pushed to October 1st of this year ahead of the travel-heavy holiday season. A real ID or passport will also be required for entering military bases, federal facilities, and nuclear power plants. Joining us today to talk about this is Henry Haupt, Press Secretary of Illinois Secretary of State. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. First off, what do people need to know before they get a real ID?
The first thing that I think people should think about is whether or not they want to apply for a real ID. Not everyone necessarily needs one, and Illinois residents have a choice. If, for instance, you're someone who does not fly domestically and you don't visit secure federal facilities, you don't necessarily need a real ID. You may just want to renew your standard driver's license or standard ID card when they come to their expiration dates. In addition to that, as you had mentioned earlier, if you have a valid U.S. passport or a military ID or one of the many documents that TSA will accept for domestic travel, you don't necessarily need a real ID.
What are the documents that people will need to gather for attaining the real ID for the first time? What do they need to know?
So the first step is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security is requiring people to prove their identity and their citizenship or lawful presence. And you can do that with a variety of documents. The main ones people tend to bring in are a certified copy of their birth certificate or a valid U.S. passport. The next step individuals would bring in is proof of their Social Security number. Again, there are a variety of documents you can bring in to prove your Social Security number. Many people bring in either their Social Security card or they'll bring in a W-2 or a pay stub. Those documents just have to have your full Social Security number and not just the last 4 digits. The next category, you have to prove your address, the residency that you currently live at. And you're required to bring in 2 documents proving address. Fairly simple. You could bring in, for instance, a bank statement or a utility bill. We just ask that they not be more than 90 days old. And last, you can bring in your current driver's license or ID card. When you have all those documents collected, you visit your nearest driver services facility, and our public service representatives will take your documents, they will scan them, return them back to you, and within 15 business days, you will be mailed your Real ID driver's license or Real ID card.
I thank you very much. I know this is very useful information to everyone watching, and just a reminder that they still have time, but until October 1st of this year, to get the Real ID. Thanks again, Henry Haupt, for joining us this evening.
Alex, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate the interview.
And we're back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
And that's our show for this Monday night.
Please join us tomorrow at 7.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud of its partners named Illinois Leading Lawyers by the Law Bulletin Publishing Company of Chicago.